Ever feel like you were born in the wrong decade? Or maybe stuck right in the middle of two? Hey, I'm Toliano, and today we are diving deep into some fascinating generational psychology. We're talking about the psychology of Xennials, a group of people who remember both rotary phones and the first iPhone launch. This cusp generation, born from roughly 1976 to 1985, often gets lost in the Gen X versus Millennials debate. But the unique Xennial personality deserves its own focus. It's a key part of understanding generational differences. In this video, we'll get this microgeneration explained. We'll look at the Oregon Trail generation's experience of an analog childhood, digital adulthood, and the massive digital revolution impact. Forget simplistic labels like MBTI. This is about a deep-seated cultural identity psychology. We'll touch on everything from the Gen X mindset and work ethic differences to millennial burnout and even forms of generational trauma. By offering some psychology simplified, we can better grasp the nuances of Xennials versus Millennials and Xennials versus Gen X. Some call them elder millennials, but the reality is that Xennials are distinct. What happened during that specific slice of history created something that's genuinely worth examining. So today, we're going to explore what makes them so interesting from a psychological perspective. From the start, you spent your childhood in a totally analog world where boredom was just something you sat with, where you had to actually remember phone numbers. And not to mention the dread if you missed your favorite TV show, it was just gone. Forever. Yet, one day, right as you were moving into adulthood, the entire world went digital. Not gradually, but suddenly. The timing of this shift had consequences that are still playing out. Most generations grow up entirely in one technology paradigm or the other. Xennials, however, went through both of these life-defining experiences during the exact years you were still discovering yourself. Your late teens looked completely different from your 20s, and the technological gap between those years was far wider than most generations experience. Think about it. Remember how much of your teens were spent passing physical notes in class, having conversations that just disappeared into thin air, or making plans where you couldn't text running late or where are you? You just showed up and hoped your friends would be there. That required a completely different kind of trust and commitment than what exists now. But then, you were in your 20s and watched everyone get cell phones. You signed up for Friendster, then MySpace, then Facebook. Before social media, most people only had three ways to contact someone: their home phone, their work phone, or just showing up at their house. Then suddenly, you had 17 different messaging apps and you just figured it out. During your formative years, you experienced both worlds. According to research on brain development, the prefrontal cortex, the region that mediates our ability to adapt to new situations and learn complex skills, is still maturing until roughly the age of 25. A study published in Nature Neuroscience found that this region matures well into our 20s. This means that Xennials were still in this high plasticity window when the technological landscape went through a complete overhaul. Can you imagine the impact of that? You were young enough that picking up new technology felt natural, but old enough to remember what came just before it. Because they were already adults when this digital shift began, Gen Xers can sometimes be a bit skeptical of new technology. Millennials, on the other hand, particularly the younger ones, have no real memory of life before the internet. But if you're a Xennial, you've experienced both, which has created a kind of digital analog bilingualism that's pretty rare. You can have a face-to-face conversation without checking your phone every 30 seconds, but you also don't get anxious about learning new software. You remember what it felt like to be genuinely unreachable for hours at a time, which is an experience a lot of younger people simply don't have. But you're also not intimidated by technology the way some older generations are. And this shows up in ways you might not even notice. Like, you probably have a different relationship with privacy than other generations. You grew up in a world where your embarrassing moments just faded into memory instead of living forever on social media. That awful 7th grade haircut, that messy breakup, that one drunk night at a party. There's no photo evidence. It just exists in the stories people tell. This creates a fundamentally different relationship with your past. Your memories could evolve, could become stories, could change shape over time the way human memory naturally works. You weren't trapped by documentation. Research on autobiographical memory suggests that the way we store and recall personal experiences is actually quite fluid. Our brains are designed to edit memories, keep what matters, and let the rest fade. When everything is permanently documented and searchable, that natural process gets complicated in ways we're still trying to understand. But here's where the story gets a little messy. You also entered the job market right around the 2008 financial crisis, which means a lot of you experienced significant economic instability during the exact years when you were supposed to be establishing your careers. That timing matters more than people realize. Research on economic hardship shows that financial trauma during this life stage can have lasting psychological effects. People who experience job loss or financial instability during these crucial years often carry that trauma forward, even long after their situations improve. It shapes how you think about money, security, and risk in ways that don't easily go away. So you've got this generation that learned to adapt to massive technological change, but also got economically burned right as they were trying to build stability. You can navigate change because you had to, but you might also have this underlying current of what if it all falls apart again, running through your decision making. And nobody really talks about this combination. The cultural conversation about generations tends to pit Gen X against millennials, as if everyone born after 1965 and before 2000 is basically the same. But the specific years you were born in, especially during periods of rapid change, create distinct experiences that don't fit into those broad categories. Xennials deal with a paradox that's honestly pretty unique. You have the self-reliance and skepticism of Gen X because you grew up before helicopter parenting became standard. Your parents probably didn't know where you were for hours at a time, and that was just normal. You learned to solve problems on your own, to entertain yourself, to deal with boredom and frustration without immediate adult intervention. At the same time, you reached adulthood during the optimistic early days of the internet, when technology was still seen as a force to connect everyone and solve everything, before we all realized that it might actually be making some things a lot more complicated. It's a strange place to be, isn't it? Independent yet cooperative, skeptical yet optimistic, digital but analog. What seems to define Xennials is this ability to hold contradictions without it feeling weird. You remember the before and the after, which means you're able to see what was gained and what was lost. You're probably not as purely nostalgic for the good old days in the same way Gen X sometimes is, because you genuinely appreciate modern conveniences. But unlike many younger generations, you viscerally recognize what we gave up in the process. You lost the ability to be truly alone with your thoughts without effort. You lost the patience that comes from waiting. You lost a certain kind of presence that existed when there wasn't always something else competing for your attention. But you gained connection, information, and possibilities your younger self couldn't have imagined. So if you're a Xennial, you've probably spent your life feeling like you don't quite fit in anywhere. Too young for some things and too old for others. Caught between two worlds. That's not a flaw. In fact, that's the defining feature of your generation's experience. In a world that keeps changing faster than anyone can predict, having lived through one massive transition might be one of the most valuable things you could have learned. You've adapted to a transitional lifestyle. The environment in which you were raised doesn't necessarily have to be the one in which you live forever. The Xennial experience is worth understanding because of that more than anything. Not because you're special in some superior way, but because you lived through a specific moment in history that taught you something the rest of us are still trying to figure out: how to adapt without losing yourself in the process. If this resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe to Motivation with Toliano, and if you want to help me keep making content like this, you can consider becoming a channel member. Your support genuinely means the world. I've got some other videos queued up that I think you'll connect with different topics, but with the same kind of psychological depth. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for exploring this unique slice of history with me, and I'd love to hear your own analog childhood, digital adulthood stories in the comments below.